Well, Val, it's great to see you again. This is great. We're in the beautiful offices in New York of the Big East Conference, where you currently sit as the commissioner of the Big East Conference. We met back in 1996-97. You were working with David Stern of the NBA and had launched the WNBA, and I was publishing the Women's Sports Wire. So I'm grateful, thankful to have the opportunity to talk with you about your career. I just want to spend the time today to talk about your career choices, the career path, what you've seen, some of your greatest challenges, and also diversity in sports and women's sports, and how you managed all of this as a mom and a wife. So let's try to go back to the beginning if we could. You started out at the University of Virginia. You competed in basketball there. You were one of the first women to receive an athletic scholarship there, captained the team, received honors in academic honors. From there you played professional basketball in France, took a position as a corporate banking associate for a couple of years, and then landed in the NBA, where you started as a staff attorney, and then were promoted to special assistant with David Stern, then promoted to vice president of business affairs, and then, of course, the president of the WNBA. So I'm curious, as you started your career, was professional sports where you wanted to go? And what was it like to work for David Stern, an icon in sports, you know, as you started out?
Well, it was an unplanned journey, for sure. I really, most of all, when I was in college especially, wanted to be a lawyer. If I had a career dream, it was that, to go to law school and to be a lawyer. My sense of the business was pretty vague. I didn't know much about the profession, but I saw the lawyers arguing in front of the Supreme Court on television, and maybe that inspired me or something, but that was a dream. And it was really when I was in law school that I began to knit together the idea of being a lawyer in the sports world. So when I graduated from law school, I sent out letters to leagues, to players' unions, to sports organizations that I thought might have in-house legal departments. Got turned down by everybody. It was a bit humbling. And so the advice I got was, if you want to be a lawyer in the sports world, get some experience being a lawyer. And that's what I did. That's why I wound up at a Wall Street law firm, to get that legal experience. It had nothing to do with sports. So when I began working at the NBA, after my 2 years on Wall Street, it really was a dream come true. Not one that I had thought a lot about growing up, but because I was so interested in basketball and had played the sport, was a fan, that I would say was really a career high, to get the job offer to work at the NBA. And that began what turned into a 16-year stay at, in my judgment, the greatest sports league in the world. It was a time when the NBA business was just taking off. David Stern was in his 4th year as commissioner when I started, so he was on the beginning, at the beginning stages of what became a 30-year journey for him in that job. So it was really exciting to be part of the league at that time, when so many things were taking off, and to be involved, first of all, on the men's side, and then ultimately to be involved with the launch of the WNBA and things that were beginning to happen in the mid-90s in women's sports in historic ways, was just an incredible career experience for me. And I learned a lot from that. It was you know, a hectic time because I was raising small children when I was going through this incredible professional experience, but just an amazing way to work in the sports business, to be affiliated with David and the league at a time when so much was happening in basketball.
And I know you have a family lineage in athletics. Your dad was your high school athletic director, and I think your grandfather was the director of athletics for the state of New Jersey. Did that shape kind of your interest in terms of the interest in sports?
Very much so. I grew up in a small town. These were the pre-Title IX years, I like to call them. There were no organized sports for girls in my town. We had a community pool, and I swam on the swim team in the summer. But in terms of playing basketball or soccer or any other sports that are so taken for granted, I think, today by parents and young kids alike, we didn't have any of it. So my dad was really my ticket. He took a great interest in my sports interest. My brother is a little bit younger than I. He would nurture. We'd play in the yard, we'd hit tennis balls at the community courts. He would shoot baskets with us and really did everything. So he was very much an inspiration, and I guess ultimately professionally, because as you mentioned, he was an AD, he was a basketball referee, he was an athlete himself. My grandfather was an AD, he was a coach, had been a sports playing youth himself in the 20s and 30s, and so that really is in my DNA to be, I think, in this line of work. So they were inspirations for sure. And, my sadness is my dad isn't around. He passed away when I was just a few months into my job at the NBA in 1988. And so he didn't have the ability to kind of see my career, but I think about him every day. And, he was really great with people, got along with everybody. And I think, the way he worked as well as what he did was very much an inspiration for me. My mom was an inspiration too. She was, she worked for the state of New Jersey, had various positions there, was a working mom, and that wasn't all that common. Many moms back in that day were stay at home, but my mom was working. And so I took a lot from that as well, and very proud of what she was able to accomplish in her career. So the combination, I think we're all affected by what our parents do, and we learn from them. And that was very much my experience with both of my parents, and I guess with my grandfather as well, because of his sports connections.
So let's talk a little bit about your career choices. Obviously starting out at the NBA, and then you were moved on as the first female president of USA Basketball, the national governing body for basketball. Then you moved on to commissioner of the Big East Conference. I'm curious in terms of why you left the WNBA at the time you did, and why the move from professional sports into collegiate athletics.
My experience at the NBA was really singular. I mean, it was a great company to be part of, a great job. I started out on the men's side. I was a staff attorney, was there for about 18 months in that role, working principally for Gary Bettman, was my first boss in sports. He was at that time the general counsel of the NBA. He's now the commissioner of the National Hockey League. So Gary was my first boss, started working quickly for Russ Granick, the longtime deputy commissioner of the NBA, very well respected in our business. Started working with him on sort of projects that included working on the first dream team that played in Barcelona in basketball, which was very exciting. David brought me into the commissioner's office when I'd been at the league for about a year and a half. So for a while I was sort of working for all three of the guys. I mean, it was very chaotic in many ways, but very exciting. And I guess I threw a curveball at all of them because I became pregnant with my first child in 1992, and I will say that was a challenging time for me professionally. That sort of, there was no precedent for that at the league. There weren't any women that were working in senior roles, certainly none that had children. And so that was sort of uncharted terrain for all of us. I was very intent on coming back to work, which I did. But I will say, I think my bosses were a bit thrown for a loop on what to do with me because of that turn of events. I came back, 2 years later I had my second daughter, and then came back from that as well. And that's when things really, 1994, that's when things really started to unfold in women's basketball. We were gearing up for the Atlanta Olympics in 1996. I was working as a point person with USA Basketball. We came up with the idea to support the women's Olympic basketball team in '96 with a year-long tour that started the year before. So I was very involved in that, and it was really from that initiative that the WNBA sort of sprung. We had a internal working committee that started working quietly in 1995 on a women's pro league that would launch after the Atlanta Olympics. And that, in short, was what happened. Coming out of Atlanta with this gold medal for Team USA, we were basically ready to go. We were making announcements in the spring and summer of '96. I was announced as the WNBA president in August following the Olympics. And that year that led to the first season in 1997 was really, it was just a whirl and whir of activity. It was, a to-do list that kept getting longer, not shorter, and many details that had to get ironed out. and dealt with, but the league launched in the summer of '97. I was the first president. You and I, of course, spent time together during that stretch because of what your work covering the league and women's sports at that time. So it was incredibly exciting, and that was my role for 8 years. It was highs and lows, mostly highs, but very hard work, and and very hard to step away from when I made that decision in '04. But it was really driven by my family obligations. It had been very tough to be a working mom through that. My husband was working, we had help, and that helped. But it was really hard to sort of be everything.
Sure.
And at the time I left, the league seemed to be in pretty good shape. We had a good foundation, and it seemed like the right time to make that move, so I stepped away. Fortunately, I'd been on the USA Basketball Board for many years, and the opportunity to serve as board chair presented itself, and that was my landing place in essence after the WNBA. So I took that job as president of USA Basketball, and that led to other things. But really, that experience to run the league, to help lead the launch of the league, what it represented, I think, at that time for women's sports, and women's team sports in particular, was really exciting, because they were really taking off in the mid-'90s. Soccer followed, other sports were on the horizon. So it was a very impactful decade for women's sports, and again, something that I was very proud to be part of.
Did you have a desire to move into college athletics, or how did
Not
the
at that
East?
time. When I left the WNBA, the immediate next thing was USA Basketball, the opportunity to lead that. That led to my work with FIBA, the International Basketball Federation, on whose board I served for 8 years. While I was doing both, I picked up other work. I was teaching. I was working on boards, including in college sports. I was helping ESPNW with things that they were doing to help launch ESPNW, now a very prominent women and sport website. And I was doing some consulting work in women's sports. So I had this portfolio of activities that I would say was sort of aimless. I mean, it was really cool stuff I was working on. The beauty of it was I could work from home, and I was able to be with my daughters as they were going through middle school and high school. So that's kind of where I was. And then what happened in the spring of 2013, the Big East had reconfigured. I mean, you see all of our history here, but it was around that time that the league, the old league, was fracturing. Football and basketball interests had divided it. The 7 schools now in the new Big East left the old Big East to form their own conference, brought with them 3 other basketball schools to form what we now call the Big East Conference, and it was in the spring of 2013 that they were looking for a new commissioner, and that's where I came into the picture. So I was contacted then by a search firm, and that led to my current role, but it was unplanned. I mean, I was very interested because I knew of the league, I knew the history of the league. I knew this guy, Dave Gavitt, who was the founder of the conference and whom I had worked with as a young executive at the NBA, had great respect for Dave. And the idea of carrying on his legacy in a basketball-centric conference was very interesting to me. So that's really where it came from. It wasn't anything planned, it was really timing. And sort of on a personal note, my youngest daughter was going off to college that year, so my husband and I were empty nesters, and I had the bandwidth to take something like this on. So it was really that simple. It was sort of timing and where I was and where they were. So great fortune, because this has been an incredible league to be part of, and I'm very proud to have done what we've done over the last 4 years, but it was certainly not anything that 20 years ago I saw coming.
So let's talk a little bit about diversity in sports. You've just recently been named to the board of U.S. Soccer, which is now moving you into another sport, a national governing body across the country. We had the opportunity to sit down a couple of months ago and talk about diversity in sports. From the women's perspective, what do you think has been your main challenges as a woman in the sports industry, and how did you navigate a time like that back in professional sports when it was a very male-dominated industry?
Well, the good news is things are changing in terms of more diversity in sports. By that I mean in the leader ranks. I mean, thanks to Title IX, we have more women than ever playing sports at the high school, collegiate, professional and international levels, and I've in effect had a front row seat at all of those changes. So that's now 45 years into Title IX, which has been amazing and important. And I was a beneficiary of that because of my experience playing at the University of Virginia. I was a high school athlete. It was very cool. My dad was actually the athletic director of my high school, and he was an advocate for girls' sports, so that was helpful. But when I went off to college at Virginia, women's sports were really just getting off the ground. So I was a beneficiary of this development, having gotten a scholarship at UVA, watching our team grow. So I'm very cognizant of being on the ground floor, you know, of what happened in college sports. So to see now where we are at that level is very satisfying. Where we need to catch up is at the leader ranks, whether it's in the pro sports, college sports, really at every level. You know, what I see is sort of glass half full in some ways. Now there are more women like us at a leader level, on boards, working in senior management positions for sports organizations, helping make decisions that impact men and women alike, better reflecting what we see at the participatory levels. If more girls are playing, then we need more women leading. It just, to me, it's so obvious, you know, it just sort of flows so naturally. And that's happening. Is it enough women? No, not really. I mean, we could use more women commissioners in college boards, certainly need more women ADs. The ranks of the presidents who are making many of these hiring decisions, there's not many women. College boards, which often weigh in and have an important role with respect to hiring decisions, are diversifying, so that's improving. But there's still work to be done. I will say internationally, a lot of work needs to be done. I really felt this when I was on the board at FIBA, the International Basketball Federation. I was just one of a handful of women on their board. They don't have many women in management at the IF levels for any sport. The IOC is coming along very slowly. The number of women on the IOC is relatively low. It's in the 20% range. The National Olympic Committees globally don't have as many women as, in my opinion, they need to have, again, to reflect the number of women playing and to make important decisions about athlete development in many countries. So that's important to do. And the good news is organizations like the UN, human rights organizations have gotten themselves involved in this. You know, women of like mind in many countries are starting to come together to try to develop policies, to do advocacy work, to do everything from opinion pieces to showing up at meetings, just pushing the cause. So I think, you know, little by little it's going to change. But you know, the good news again is that it is better. And I'm hopeful. I'm going to stay hopeful on this. I think with the number of young women who are getting into sports, who are have important experiences that will in turn help them to move up and lead someday, I think the future looks bright.
Is there, in terms of some time ago, we talked a little bit about being the only woman in the room. You've sat on a number of boards. You've been the only woman in the room. Do you still find yourself the only woman in the room?
The answer is yes. I mean, I have this acronym for it. I call it a WITR, you know, only woman in the room. And it does happen. I mean, it does. And the higher up you go, the more likely it is to happen. So, you know, I've just kind of gotten used to it, to be honest. I mean, I think, you know, being a good leader, there's so many gender-neutral qualities, I think, that go into good leadership, and I've just tried to incorporate them into how I operate. I mean, I think good leaders, you know, have common traits, you know, whether they're male or female, and they include good communication skills and lots of stamina, you know, being organized, having both strategic capabilities as well as, at some level, being good operators, because you have to have a mind about the details in order for things to get done. because leading is about execution at the end of the day. So, you know, I just try to carry those attributes into whatever I'm doing. But it is, you know, it is interesting that, you know, those moments still happen. The good news is they don't happen as much as they used to. And I'm actually very proud of what I see in college sports at the commissioner level, for example, because right now I believe in Division I there's 10 women who are commissioners. They're an amazing group of people. I have great respect for my fellow female commissioners who are very talented. They work incredibly hard. They're really smart. They're very, you know, in many cases, very knowledgeable about the college space, which is critically important, much more than I, because I've only been in this space for 4 years. They're very tough. You know, they speak their minds, and they get things done. Mm-hmm. So they're great role models for me, you know, and I think they're going to be great role models for other women who want to move up from AD to commissioner or coming out of college sports and moving in like I did. They can do a lot. So things are changing, which is very good. But again, I just, you know, try to do my job as a professional and focus most of all on those qualities that you need to have in order to get things done.
Let's go back a little bit to women's sports. At the time that you and I were in it, it was 96, 97 coming off the Olympic gold medals, right? I mean, everything, Sports Illustrated had come out with Sports Illustrated for Women magazine. Sporting goods retailers, manufacturers were jumping on the bandwagon to create and develop and design product and apparel for women, girls and women. Here we are, 20 years later, as you mentioned, 45 years into Title IX. The WNBA attendance, I think, just recently had the best year in the last 6 years. Are you surprised or disappointed in any way as to where we are today?
I'm actually very heartened because by where women's sports are today, because what I saw in the 90s was mostly novelty. You know, women's college basketball had been around, but was cresting and was getting on people's radar screens, particularly at the top levels with the UConn and Tennessee relationship in particular, national news every year. But at the pro sports level, it was something new. The WNBA launched in 97. Women's soccer got onto the radar in 99, the famous 99ers who played in the Women's World Cup, the first one that really caught people's attention. The Sydney Olympics and the Atlanta Olympics, so 96 to 2000 were important, and sports like softball and gymnastics, of course, and track and swimming, all the teams, the individual sports, but the team sports especially were gaining traction. So, but it was getting people's attention in a new way, and that was important, and it was leading to sponsor interest and the interest of the media and television stations and networks that hadn't really taken an active role were getting involved. So that was the good news of the 90s. What I would describe our current era as is the staying power story. You know, this is where we're, you know, these sports aren't going away. They're not, they're here to stay. They're irreversibly entrenched in the sports landscape as I see it. You know, is it hard work? Yes. Are they still going to require lots of elbow grease and strategy and, you know, thoughtful business planning in order to build their audiences? Yes, because it's a cluttered environment. Lots of leagues are competing for attention now. And so that's where I think these women's sports properties have to get to. That's the next phase, is okay, we're here to stay. People accept that we're playing. We have our niches. Young girls and young boys alike see our athletes as role models. Corporate America understands the value of our demographic base, particularly our female base, who have great consumer power. And you know, and that's being recognized. Networks see the value of the programming because there's a lot of outlets now that need content. So I think all of that is just a fact. And so now they just, it's into the nuances of running sports organizations that the NBA and baseball and football, all the men's leagues have had to fight through over the decades that they've been in existence. So we've gone from novelty to staying power. These are properties for the media age. The athletes are likable, they're attractive, they're appealing role models. So I'm hopeful. I think women's sports will only grow, and as these young girls play and feed into the pipeline, I think the quality of the competitions will only increase, and that's a critical factor too, as you're building sports as entertainment, which is at some level what the pro leagues are all about.
So after Peter Ueberroth was running the '84 Olympics, there was an endowment that went to the Amateur Athletic Foundation, and they had done a media study. At the time, it was 3 to 7% of coverage went to media for women's sports. So if you still pick up the newspaper today, it still seems like that hasn't moved a whole lot. Do you think technology and the online platform is going to help level the playing field for women in sports today?
I hope technology helps. I think if you ask anybody associated with women's sports, if there's enough coverage of women's sports in the media, you'll, I think without exception hear the answer, no. I mean, there's not, in my opinion, enough coverage. But the good news is with more outlets, there can be more coverage. We're not limited now to sports dailies, for example, saying, okay, we only have a certain amount of inches every day that we can allocate to sports. So NFL's going to get this, and college football's going to get that, and National Hockey League's going to get that, and everybody else is going to get, a fraction. It's not like that anymore. They have the print dailies that I think still go through those algorithms, but now you have the online editions where technically the bandwidth is infinite. So the combination of online outlets for the traditional sports publications, plus the new outlets, which in some cases are specialized. You have outlets now like ESPNW, like Excel, many blogs that are specialty publications, if you will, for women's sports. That's helping. You have athlete forums now, like the Players Tribune, which is tailored for athlete points of view, and they have men and women's athletes alike who are putting content up there. And then you have social media, so athletes now can go direct to consumer. So for women's athletes in particular, it's an incredible platform. They don't have to go through the filter of their team media relations director or hope, that a traditional daily is going to tell their story. They can tell their story on their own. So I think social media in particular can really open things up for female athletes. So I think that's a positive. I feel a little personal about this because I'm not on social media, and I have to get onto this because I think the executives can also do a better job of telling the stories here. I have a story to tell, you have a story to tell. I think, there are points of view that we just have to find time in our days to articulate. I, tend to be, so with my head down about getting through the day that I haven't thought enough about how the executives, that number of us who really, I do think, bring a bird's eye view on what's happening, what has happened, and what will happen or could happen, have our stories to tell, and I'm kind of grateful for this opportunity to begin to articulate that. But again, I think that with this growing number of ways to tell the story, that women's sports can only benefit.
So let's talk about some of your greatest career moments. In 1989, you were one of the first NBA's appointees to the board of directors for USA Basketball, the national governing body that is responsible for the selection and training of the United States teams to compete in international tournaments, including the World Cup and the Olympics. During that time, you acted as a liaison with the NBA and were involved in the '92 Olympics, the '94 World Cup, and of course the '96 Olympics. And the women's basketball team, the Dream Team, that went 60-0, and you were a driving force between winning that gold medal and the gold medals at that time in men's and women's basketball. NBA championships, WNBA championships, Olympic gold medals. What were some of the best career moments for you and the most exciting, and why? What had the most meaning and significance for you?
Yeah, well, all of those. I mean, those were all, incredible. I mean, I've been really lucky to have been with the sport of basketball during so many sort of punctuation marks in the history of the sport. And there's so many. I mean, I think I'll miss a bunch here, but the '92 Olympics, which, as you mentioned, I had a chance to work on as an NBA liaison to USA Basketball. The gold medal in Barcelona with that team at that time was really an incredible moment for the sport of basketball. The '96 Olympics were impactful because they were here in the U.S. On the men's side, it was their third dream team. So a little less novel, you know, than it had been in '92, but on the women's side, very impactful because that gold medal, which was a great game, by the way, USA-Brazil at the Georgia Dome, did in fact directly lead to the launch of the WNBA, which was incredible. And that first game, I was there, of course, for the opening game of the WNBA in 1997, Liberty versus the Sparks in Los Angeles. Was very historic, a little bit chaotic, but an amazing moment for all of us who were part of that. And then, you know, so many games along the way, whether it was WNBA All-Star games, NBA All-Star games. I will say in the college space, being able to watch Villanova win the national championship in NCAA men's basketball in 2016 was, especially for this league, a red letter moment. I mean, it was a great game, thrilling finish in a dome. You know, it was being described rightly as one of the greatest finishes in college basketball history. So to be courtside watching that game was something I'll never forget. So it's, you know, it's been a really fun experience to be involved in so many different levels of basketball, and to see this great sport growing, and to see how unique it is not only here in the U.S. but globally. I mean, soccer is kind of unto itself, especially outside of the U.S. But basketball is special because it's global. You know, it's hitting people of all ethnicities and cultures, and importantly, it's reaching men and women alike. So it's been a great sport for me to be part of.
Yeah, it's great. The Women's '99 World Cup, I had a chance to be at that, and that was just one of the many in the WNBA launch.
Sports.
Yeah, yeah, incredible. So you have sat on a number of boards. It would be hard-pressed to say that you have landed in all of these things because of luck. What do you attribute to your success and leadership qualities and things like that that have helped you in your career?
I give a lot of credit to my early mentors in basketball. I started working at the NBA, you know, in 1988. I started out as a lawyer there, but the league at that time was still pretty small. It was less than 100 people. They were concentrated in effect, a floor and a half in Midtown Manhattan. I started working in the legal department, but it was easy to get noticed there by the top people, and that's basically what happened to me. I was working for Gary Bettman, who was the general counsel at the time, but had a chance to, you know, in short order begin working for the Commissioner David Stern and Deputy Commissioner Russ Granick. And candidly, they made my career possible. I mean, I wouldn't be here today if not for the two of them and Gary. They opened doors for me. They pushed to get me on boards. So I was sort of an early NBA representative to the boards of USA Basketball, the Basketball Hall of Fame. With Russ in particular, I started working in international basketball. So I can't tell you how important that was for me to be in the room, you know, sitting in on meetings, being able to be on conference calls, being able to be on boards. I mean, I wasn't participating a whole lot, but I was able to soak up what was happening, to learn. I consider Dave Gavitt, the founder of the Big East Conference, a mentor. Dave, at the time I was coming up in the NBA, was the president of USA Basketball at a time when I was a junior NBA representative on their board. Dave was the president of the Basketball Hall of Fame. I was on that board, was able to learn from Dave. He was an incredible leader, had a great style, very effective consensus builder. I just loved the game, you know, and that was obvious. So to learn from, and they were disparate. David Stern was a very different leader than Dave Gavitt, but to be able to pick up different leader styles from these guys, you know, who took a shine to me and really made my career possible was really important. So they kind of got me in the room. You know, from there I just worked hard, I think, made the sacrifices that you have to make in order to advance, particularly in our business, which is very hard because it's weekend work, you have to be at games, it's a lot of travel. So, you know, I really had to put in the time over the years, and that's particularly tough when you're trying to raise children. So I've made some sacrifices there. My husband Charlie has been an amazing partner in the raising of our kids. But I really credit my mentors with making it possible for me to get in there and to show what I had. And, and that's all you can hope for, and then you hope that you in turn are making those opportunities available for the people who are going to follow in your footsteps.
We talked a little bit about where women are in the sports industry. So it doesn't seem like it's really that much different than it is in other industries from the work that we see in executive search. A lot of spotlight right now on technology, Silicon Valley, diversity. Is there anything you think can and should be done to help women move up the ranks, and what do you see in relation to the pay equity topic?
Well, I think to sort of continue this process of diversification in sports, critically important goal. It seems to be a shared goal, but where people tend to get tripped up is how you get there. And I've been on many meetings in my role with the Big East, but even before I started in my position here on that topic and how we get from A to B and B to C and so forth. So again, the good news is the goal is shared. It's how do we move the ball forward? And I think I think there's probably three buckets to attack. One is the pipeline, making sure that there are young women, people of color, that are getting into sports, that have the opportunity to learn the business, and that are getting nurtured, that are being recognized for their talents and are getting the training and the mentorship that they need to keep moving through the system. So pipeline development, I think, is one piece of this. Second is hiring practices. I mean, it's one thing to talk about hiring women or people of color, but the hiring managers have to pull the trigger. They have to be very intentional. They just have to hire people. I mean, it's not enough to talk about it. So whether it's an athletics director hiring a junior person in their department, whether it's a president hiring an AD, frankly, whether it's a board hiring a president, there at the end of the day are people who are actually making the decision to hire, and they're the ones that ultimately have to say, okay, if all things are equal, if we have two candidates who are of equal caliber, who bring identical skill sets or comparable skill sets to the job, I'm going to make the decision to hire a person of color or a woman because I believe in that. I want to do that because of all the benefits that that's going to bring to my staff. It has to be intentional by the hiring manager. And then finally, once diversity candidates who are now hired get into their positions, there has to be mentoring and nurturing to make sure that they're in a comfortable work environment, because you sometimes hear that doesn't always happen. You may feel like you're the only woman in the room, so whoever is in the job with you has to maybe work a little bit harder to make sure that the particular needs that you have, for example, if you're a working parent or you're pregnant and you're trying to fight through working during maternity, I mean those are particular circumstances that have to be tended to with care, and that doesn't always happen. So to me, those are the sort of the levels of attention that have to be paid, in order to make all of this happen. And it's not necessarily an overnight process to make all those things fit together, but it should be a faster process than it is now. And to your point, my sense is it's not just an issue in sports. It sort of cuts across industries. So I think there could be some room there for cross-pollination.
Sure. As
different industry groups think out how they can work together. A very close friend of mine, I'll share an anecdote, college classmate who was herself on the women's basketball team at Virginia with me, works in engineering, and we had this conversation recently. She was sort of remarking about how in her business, she works for a major engineering firm, you know, the level of diversity is quite low. And we were just exchanging notes on sort of the common themes in engineering and in the sports world, and sort of it struck me that there's probably not enough talking among industry segments about how best practices could be deployed across those segments. So more to be done, but again, I remain an optimist. I think we can hopefully see more progress.
So you have had this storied career in sports. What you've already left this huge significant legacy behind you. What else is it that you would potentially like to leave behind you, and where does Val Ackerman go from here?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't, you know, I don't have a plan here. I will say I love the Big East. I love what this conference represents. I like especially that our presidents don't just care about the athletic piece of our work. They're very committed to the academic success of our students. We have an exceptionally high graduation rate among student athletes in our conference. Very few of our athletes are going to play pro sports. I mean, a few may play basketball, a couple may play baseball. We have a couple have made it into Major League Soccer. We have a couple that'll make it into the WNBA, but the vast majority of these students are going to go on and be like me. They're going to go on and work in something else. They're going to be doctors or lawyers or engineers, educators. Maybe they'll run for public office. So they have to have a degree. They may have to have a graduate degree. They have to have had a full college experience to get to where they need to get to or want to get to when they get when they get off their campuses and get into the real world. So I really, it means a lot to me that my presidents care about that, and they care about the full person, the complete development of these young people. So I enjoy being part of that, helping in a modest way through our work here at the conference. I'm involved in some NCAA national matters, and I want to be as helpful as I can, whether it's in men's basketball or women's basketball or other things. I still have a hand in some work internationally. I would like to see women's sports make more progress globally. And while I'm no longer on the board of the International Basketball Federation, you know, I'm still hounding there and trying, with the help of others, to keep the ball moving forward globally with women's sports. And I'm trying to be helpful to my daughters. My daughters are now 25 and 23. They're out of college. They're trying to find their way. They're both strong, very strong. They, they can shout me down, and do often. But I want to be as helpful to them as I can. I believe in their careers and want to see them successful in whatever it is they want to pursue, which will likely not be sports. So I think as a parent, that's important. Parenting never ends. So I don't have a particular career goal at this point, but I do want to help others, because at some point you start to realize you're on the back nine or the back three and not the front nine. And so if I can be helpful to others, that's that would be the most I can ask for.
As a mom myself, and you having raised two young daughters at a very early age in the beginning of your career, is there anything else that you can say would help in terms of women and the individual and differing needs that they have?
I think to be successful in whatever field it is you choose, there's many attributes that are required or desired. But at the end of the day, I always think about the need for sacrifice. I mean, particularly if you want to have a family. And that was very much my experience, and it in fact affected my career path, because at the end of the day, I spent many years at the WNBA. It was a dream job. I loved what I did, but it was very hard to balance the demands of that work with wanting to be the kind of mother I wanted to be for my daughters. So at the time I left the league, we're 12 and 10. I'd had my position in basketball when they were born. I mean, that's all they knew was mom running out the door to go to work or to go to a game. And it was, I think, exciting for them. They look back now and I think they took a lot away from that, but it was very hard on me and my husband for me to maintain that schedule. So making sacrifice, is something that any woman who wants to strive and accomplish things. I mean, they just have to accept that's part of the deal. And they may not want to do that forever, and that's their choice, but they have to accept that at some level that's part of the package. In terms of, you know, what I have found in the various leader roles I've had that have helped me understand the job and attack the job, I always come back to my 5 Ds, as I call them. I see there are 5 Ds of leadership that I come back to. The first is do. You know, good leaders have to be doers. There's just certain things that you have to do and do yourself in order to be successful. The second D is decide. Part of being a leader is you have to make the decisions. The buck stops with you, so you have to make a decision, and hopefully your decisions, or most of them anyway, will be good decisions. The third D is delegate. You have to learn how to lay some of the duties off on other people. There's just not enough hours in a day to do everything. It's not your job to do everything, so you have to get very good at hiring good people and empowering them to do their work and supervising that in the right way. The fourth D, interestingly, that I found is to defer action. Sometimes the best decision is not to make any decision. It may be just to wait things out and see how things evolved and come back to it on another day. And then the fifth D that I've had to learn, especially in the college space, is to divide up the duties. Sometimes you may need to bring in other stakeholders in order to attack a certain assignment or to handle a certain initiative. It may be that it can't be just on you or your staff. You have to bring in college sports, for example, our schools, our presidents, maybe others in the college space, other stakeholders, student athletes, business partners. And so you have to get very adept at figuring out how to sort of get other people involved and share the governance authority. So those are my 5 Ds. And I think about those, frankly, every day when I come in as I sort of attack my work and say, okay, what of these, do I handle, and what of these do I have to sort of handle with the help of others? And I think if you can get your arms around that in your space, you have a good chance of being more effective in your role.